I did my speech over Jeffrey Epstein, who you may have heard about, may have not. It's recent news. Let's just jump right into it. I believe that Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself, and I'm going to try and convince you, well, not convince you, but just tell you all about the facts surrounding his untimely death. So Jeffrey Epstein was a multimillionaire, financier, and registered sex offender. He's connected to all sorts of people, including, as you can see, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, members of the royal family, and others. He was convicted in 2008 of procuring an underage girl for prostitution. He only served 13 months, and most of that, he was allowed to come and go out of his cell as he pleased. And that was for a 14-year-old girl. So he basically had copped a plea deal because of Andrew Acosta, who would later serve on Trump's cabinet. So there was a federal investigation into him because of this, and they came up with a 53-page indictment, and that was called Operation Leap Year. But that indictment was never presented to a grand jury because of his amazing lawyers and basically his powerhouse legal team, which allowed him to get off with a much lesser charge. Instead of having sex with a minor, it was basically prostitution, soliciting a prostitute. Because he paid the 14-year-old girl, it basically was considered that she wasn't a minor at all in terms of how the sentencing went. So he spent 8 hours a day in a private wing of a local jail in Palm Beach, Florida. They had a non-prosecution agreement, which also means that none of the people who could have been, involved with his crimes would have been charged. And it never saw a grand jury. And so that was back in 2008, when the Miami Herald brought this story to light. Since then, there have been at least 10 civil suits filed against Epstein by his victims. Most notably is this woman, Virginia Jeffrey. I'm not sure entirely how to pronounce her last name. But in this picture, that's her with Prince Andrew of the royal family and Epstein's girlfriend, Maxwell. She was allegedly recruited into Epstein's orbit when she was just 17, and she claims all manner of abuse against her transpired after that. And because of her and basically her coming forward, Epstein was arrested again in July of this year, and he would die just 1 month later in prison. So in the NPR article titled "A Dead Cat, a Lawyer's Call, and a 5-Figure Donation, How the Media Fell Short on Epstein," they describe Epstein's troubled history. It's a very good article that I recommend you read it yourself. It's quite long because it goes through the entire history from his first arrest and how he basically escaped justice to where it ended up. And so it talks about the Vanity Fair article from 2002, where even at that time, over 10 years, 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, they had alleged victims coming forward giving interviews. But what happened was the editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair was intimidated, and ultimately the story was never written. The story that was written was titled "The Talented Mr. Epstein," and it talks about how he's this brilliant, enigmatic businessman who's made a bunch of money, and he's kind of charming, and it painted him in a very good light. So you can read both of these still. Oh yeah, and part of the intimidation against the editor, whose name is Graydon, that was his last name, I don't remember his first name. But he was the editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair at that time, and he had the head of a dead cat delivered to his doorstep as well as a bullet. And he also was personally berated by Epstein himself, who came to the offices of Vanity Fair. So those things combined, and probably other influences, led them to never publish this story all the way back then. And there were a few other instances where, even as more and more allegations came forward, Epstein was they never really wrote about it too much in the media. And the NPR article also details this instance of a $30,000 donation to a writer at the New York Times, who he donated this money. He solicited this money from Epstein, and then used Epstein as a source for his stories, and basically wrote good stories about Epstein. This guy was later fired, which is the good news and kind of restores my faith in journalistic integrity. Once they found out, who this source was and that he had gotten this money, which they found in his taxes and whatnot, they made sure that he didn't, work there anymore. So this video that I'm going to show you in a second shows an NBC anchor talking about all the evidence they had against Epstein back in 2009, 2010, and how her story was squashed by ABC and not allowed to air. In their defense, ABC says that they didn't have enough sources, basically, even though she talks about all the evidence that she did have. But, yeah. Oops, okay, I guess it's just...
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had verbal allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story. And then Alan Dershowitz was also implicated in it because of the planes. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to come out. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable. We had Clinton. We had everything. I tried for 3 years to get it on, to no avail, and now it's all coming out, and it's like these new revelations, and I freaking had all of it. I'm so pissed right now. Like, every day I get more and more pissed, because I'm just like, oh my God, what we had was unreal. Other women backing up. Hey, yeah. Brad Edwards, the attorney, 3 years ago, saying, there will come a day when we will realize Jeffrey Epstein was the most prolific pedophile this country has ever known. I had it all 3 years ago.
So I'll spare you the rest of the video because he just talks more about that. And I will tell you that Project Veritas is a conservative outlet, but it was a leaked video. That video was of ABC anchor Amy Robach talking about all the stuff that she had in her story with it. So, just a month after Epstein was put into prison, well, I would say the first time, actual first time doesn't even count as prison, but he was put here at the Metropolitan Correction Center, a high-security prison known for housing high-profile criminals. It's housed El Chapo, it's housed numerous gangsters in the past. This is like one of the, it's a high-profile prison for people who have committed serious crimes. So, the first incident, he was refused bail because he was considered a flight risk because he flies internationally all over the place. And they had found fraudulent passports in his New York townhome. He was placed on 24/7 suicide watch with 2 guards who checked on him every 30 minutes. They would look into his cell. Eventually he was found with broken bones in his neck and the cause of death was ruled to be a suicide. This is a picture of his cellmate. He's a tank, as you can see. But he was transferred out the day before he was killed or committed suicide. He was transferred out without a replacement just a few days before. Both cameras malfunctioned on the night that Epstein died, and the guards fell asleep. And these aren't speculations. These are all published facts you can read about in the New York Times and Reuters and other, other sources, noteworthy sources who have come forward with this information. Furthermore, Dr. Michael Baden, who's an extremely famous physician and pathologist, carried out an autopsy. He also carried out autopsies on JFK and Martin Luther King. He disputed the city's autopsy and claimed that the injuries were more typical of homicidal strangulation due to the broken bones in his neck.
Oh.
So, at this point, I just want to separate some facts from fiction. With any case as strange and twisted as this, speculation is abound. So many people claim to know exactly what happened. As I mentioned earlier, he has connections to Clinton. He also has connections to Trump and basically a bunch of other famous people. You could probably connect him to anybody wealthy if you wanted to bad enough. But the reality of the situation is that at this current time, none of us really know what exactly happened to him. Some people think he faked his death. I personally think it was likely that he was killed, but I don't really know by who, obviously, because there was a lot of effort put into this. It's also the subject of an ongoing Department of Justice investigation, so with any luck, that will yield some interesting insights about the truth of what really happened to Jeffrey Epstein. So yeah, I'll leave you, those are most of the facts, and I will let you make your own decision as to what you think his fate was. Are there any questions?
Why would they put so much effort by the DOJ to investigate if he was that bad of a person? Does it matter?
Well, I mean, not to investigate, I guess, what really happened to him, you know, because there's so much suspicious circumstances about the cameras going off and whatnot. So even though they dropped the criminal charges against him because he's dead, they still, you know, are investigating it to see hopefully what really happened.
Who do you think maybe?
Who do I think killed him?
Pedophiles.
I think
Well,
it has somebody to do from the royal family, maybe.
it could have been. I think it's
Because if
not.
that came out.
I don't think it's really one person, you know.
Rachel
I
is
think
into this.
I think it's like. I think there's a lot of people working in collusion. A lot of powerful people who had a lot to lose with a lot of
Oh,
money
yeah.
working in collusion, and they probably paid somebody a lot of money to, you know, get rid of this guy because he had a bunch of dirt, you know.
Not sure how closely connected he is with Trump, but I
Right.
know that Trump lived in North Palm Beach for a lot of his life.
There is one quote that I'll share with you from Trump. It was given, you know, years before any of these revelations came out and stuff, but there's one quote that Trump said where he talks about how great Jeffrey Epstein is, and he says, "Oh, he's a great guy. He's a great guy. He loves women just as much as me. Sometimes even younger ones." That's a quote that he said.
But the pictures came out with him
So that's
and.
kind of bad. But he also flew Clinton to his island 23 times.
Yeah, well, that's what's fascinating about this case is because he truly was equal opportunity. As long as you had money,
Yeah.
you know,
You're good.
he didn't care about politics.
You should watch, have you ever seen the documentary called An Open Secret?
Mhm.
It's about, basically about like Hollywood pedophile rings and stuff, and it was completely blacklisted. You can only find it like on the
Oh,
internet now.
That's tough. Yeah. There's some other things that I thought were interesting were like how a few weeks before these things started coming to light, Epstein had a cement truck speed delivered to his residence, and not to his residence, actually to an island. So he got that truck there very quickly.
Well, that's completely normal.
Yeah, right?
Well, thanks, Chaz.
Yeah.
Good job.